The White House's plans to throw out the 25-year-old Roadless Rule will allow for permanent road construction and timber harvesting on nearly 59 million acres.
This is one of the most effective conservation policies we have in the US. It protects over 58 million acres, some of the largest old-growth forests on the planet, clean drinking water for tens of millions of people, our most biodiverse ecosystems, critical habitat for endangered species, and outdoor recreation for millions. And it does all of that pretty much just by banning one thing.
The USDA is seeking public comment on its efforts to end the so-called Roadless Rule.
When a 3-week public comment period opened last fall, more than 600,000 comments came in. 99% of them opposed rolling back the rule, with another comment period opening potentially soon.
The Roadless Rule is currently under attack by both the White House and Congress.
I was thrilled by the announcement about the rescission of the 2001 Roadless Rule.
And within a matter of months, weeks, or even days, we could see our last opportunity to make our voices heard. The fact that we even have these roadless areas today is nothing to take for granted. I want to tell you about the people who fought to protect them and what makes these places so important. Most importantly, I want to take you here on the ground and show you what we stand to lose. I began by looking at this map made by Outdoor Alliance, which you can find in the description. I looked for roadless areas close to my home in North Carolina and far away, and before long, I was headed west to meet up with my good friend and fellow creator, Alex Harris.
We are in a roadless area in the Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming. The windstorm last night was pretty crazy, and it was hilarious to set a tent up in a windstorm.
I don't have any footage of it. They just have to believe us.
Yeah. I don't either, actually. We're quite high up right now. We're just shy of 11,000 feet, so that's why even though it's May, there's snow all over the place. And this snow melts to become the drinking water for the nearby city of Laramie, Wyoming. A lot of roadless areas contain the headwaters of drinking water for downstream municipal water supplies, including where I live, back in Colorado.
Me too, yeah.
Where you live in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. This is ground zero for the beginning of that water filtration process, and it is so cool to see the cornices on the peaks where the rivers begin to flow.
Today I'm hiking up Chihuahua Bald in North Carolina's Nantahala National Forest, hoping to find a Chihuahua Bald salamander. This is a species that only lives on this one mountain, and pretty much the entire mountain is a roadless area. So if you were to come in here, build more roads, more development, log these forests, you risk wiping out this entire species. There are plenty of examples throughout this region of salamanders that only live in these tiny little areas being wiped out or almost entirely wiped out by new roads, new development, and logging. This one, at least for now, is protected by the Roadless Rule. May 10th, 1869. A handful of railroad companies have just finished drawing a line across America, the first railroad crossing the country. Colonists are flooding into the West to cash in on a vast expanse of natural resources. They're mining gold, cutting timber, clearing land for farms and cities, displacing entire groups of people and driving entire species to extinction. All of this flows along these lines. These are the arteries for an environmental transformation of unprecedented scale. A few are beginning to warn that this is unsustainable, that if this expansion continues unchecked, the country will be left with depleted forests and a polluted water supply, including Gifford Pinchot. He wants to create forest reserves, large areas of forest managed by the government and harvested gradually rather than all at once. This isn't about the environment, it's utilitarian. These forests will be logged, mined, and dammed, just gradually, to provide a consistent supply of resources as the population grows. In 1898, Pinchot became the chief of the country's Division of Forestry, overseeing about 22 million acres of forest reserves with almost no resources. That changed in 1901. Together, Roosevelt and Pinchot created the Forest Service and vastly expanded the National Forest System. By the end of Roosevelt's presidency in 1909, the Forest Service managed more than 170 million acres of land across more than 150 national forests, including the Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming and the Tongass National Forest in Alaska, still the largest today. The same year, Aldo Leopold began working as a forest ranger in Arizona. Within a few years, he was a forest supervisor in New Mexico. His work area included the headwaters of the Gila River, a place he described as the last true wilderness in the Southwest. Indigenous peoples have lived here for thousands of years, and more recently fur trappers, cattle ranchers, and homesteaders. But this 700,000 acre area had less population and infrastructure than just about anywhere. Most importantly, it was roadless. At the same time, a rapidly expanding network of auto roads was reaching places the railroads never could. In 1921, Leopold published an article in the Journal of Forestry proposing the creation of designated wilderness areas within the national forests. Large areas, quote, preserved in their natural state, kept devoid of roads and other works of man. He predicts that more and more people will want these places for recreation, and he suggests starting right here, the Gila. The article didn't get much attention, but in 1924, Leopold got approval to create this roadless area in the Gila. And he started a bit of a trend. The next year, 5 more wilderness areas have been created, and several more were in the works. Leopold wrote more articles and asked readers to write in, stressing the importance of the public telling the Forest Service that they wanted this. It worked. In the 1930s, the Forest Service created a formal process for creating wilderness areas, banned road construction and logging within them, and designated about 9 million acres. In the 1940s, the Forest Service shifted to focus on supplying timber for the war effort. The post-war boom in the 1950s created an unprecedented demand for timber. To reach new forests and meet demand, the Forest Service began building new roads at an unprecedented rate. They depleted old-growth forests in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, eventually moving on to the Tongass. By the end of the 1950s, the amount of protected wilderness was still about 9 million acres. The Forest Service just wasn't doing it. Activists were getting tired of the inaction, including Howard Zahniser. In 1956, he drafted a bill that would allow Congress to designate wilderness areas instead of just the Forest Service. Zahniser and countless others spent 8 years advocating, lobbying, and revising the bill dozens of times. Zahniser died on May 5th, 1964. 4 months later, the bill passed. It establishes an official definition of wilderness, an area of at least 5,000 acres, which generally appears to have been affected primarily by the forces of nature, without permanent improvements or human habitation. It directs Congress to set aside such areas in a national wilderness preservation system, to, quote, secure for the American people of present and future generations an enduring resource of wilderness. And it makes crystal clear that wilderness areas are roadless. In the 1970s, the Forest Service conducted a massive inventory of all the national forests. They were looking for places that could be designated under the new Wilderness Act. Forests over 5,000 acres without roads. And they found a bunch. Thousands of roadless areas, totaling over 50 million acres. By the end of the 1900s, Congress had designated over 100 million acres of wilderness. The Forest Service had built nearly 400,000 miles of roads, one of the longest road networks in the entire world, over 8 times the length of the interstate highway system. But the rate of logging was in free fall. Forest roads were falling into disrepair, and the Forest Service couldn't afford to fix them, accumulating billions of dollars in backlogs. New lawsuits were revealing that logging in the Tongass was not just environmentally destructive, but fraudulent and unprofitable. 1998. Forest Service Chief Michael Dombeck proposes a temporary stop to new road construction in roadless areas. The next year, the Interim Roads Rule is issued, an 18-month pause during which the Forest Service will decide what to do with these roadless areas. They hold hundreds of public hearings and receive a record-breaking 1.6 million public comments, 95% of them supporting protection for roadless areas. In 2001, this is what they come up with: the Roadless Rule. It bans road building, road rebuilding, and logging in the roadless areas inventoried in the 1970s. Quote, to provide lasting protection for inventoried roadless areas. Over 58 million acres, about a third of the national forests. The amount of protected roadless land increases by more than 50% overnight. This morning, I am making my way up a little creek here in Pisgah National Forest in the great state of North Carolina, looking for, hopefully, a really cool old-growth forest. Since road construction and logging are so closely connected, roadless areas contain like a disproportionate amount of old growth. Even here in North Carolina, where old-growth forests are like exceptionally rare, a lot of them are in the roadless areas. To cut down a forest, you first have to build a road into it. On the way into this roadless area, we're hiking through a section of Medicine Bow National Forest that is not roadless. So not only can the Forest Service come in here and log this, they intend to. Take a look at a map of the area we're hiking into. Here's the roadless area, and here are all of the sections of the National Forest managed for logging. You'll notice that it reaches right up to the edge of the roadless area. So the only thing standing between these forests being logged is the Roadless Rule. Where this matters most is Alaska, the Tongass. This is the world's largest and most intact temperate rainforest, one of the most carbon-dense ecosystems on Earth, home to more old-growth forest than anywhere else in the US. More than half of it is roadless. Over 9 million acres, about 15% of all the roadless areas in the country. This executive order from last year directs Alaska's natural resources, including timber, to be developed, quote, to the fullest extent possible, and it directly attacks the Roadless Rule. If the rule is rescinded, new roads will be built, old-growth forest will be logged, and one of the planet's most important ecosystems will continue to shrink. This place is stunning. These are some of the biggest trees I've ever seen on this side of the country, and they're not in the national park, not in the wilderness area. Without the Roadless Rule, this area would be open to building a road or even logging. These are some of the last little pieces that we have of these forests. It doesn't seem too big an ask to keep them. Check this out. This is a Chihuahua bald salamander. It is super cool to see one of these. Super rare and also completely dependent on the Roadless Rule. Its entire range is within this roadless area. And on the way to finding this one, I also found a bunch of other salamander species also protected by the Roadless Rule. The Medicine Bow National Forest here is also an excellent habitat for lynx, particularly this big expanse of forest on the backside of the mountain range here, which obviously, being a big expanse of forest, is also one of the attractive areas for logging.
April and May is also when lynx have their kittens, and they have them in groups of 4, generally, which means that there's probably a lot of lynx kittens running around these forests right now, too.
That's so sick. Maybe we'll find one.
Fingers crossed. Maybe we'll find 4.
Roadless areas are key hotspots for biodiversity and provide critical habitat for endangered species, with the Forest Service identifying nearly 2,000 sensitive species relying on them. Lynx are specially adapted to live in snowy boreal forests, travel across wide ranges, and hunt snowshoe hares. Increased road building and logging destroys habitat, makes it more difficult for them to travel between remaining patches of forest, and reduces populations of snowshoe hares, which also rely on older intact forests. New roads also bring in more people and more noise, further restricting the lynx's movement. Roads are perhaps the clearest example of what's called habitat fragmentation. The more pieces you cut an ecosystem into, the less healthy it becomes. As species are fragmented into smaller and smaller populations, they lose genetic diversity and become more vulnerable to extinction. Salamanders in Appalachia, grizzly bears in Montana, caribou in Alaska. Roads also make it much easier for invasive species to spread and outcompete native species. I am standing in a river that is almost entirely within a roadless area. And this river is also an excellent habitat for eastern hellbenders, these giant salamanders that only live in the Appalachian Mountains. Very rare and very endangered. The main threats to them are pollution and habitat fragmentation, which in this watershed, having no roads and no logging, does a really good job keeping that out. Hellbenders are nocturnal, so I'm gonna come back a few nights this week and see if I can find one. This river is also the primary water source for all of these towns downstream. Even if you've never visited a roadless area, you might be drinking water from one. Denver, Portland, Seattle, Atlanta, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles. More than 60 million people rely on the national forests for their water supply, and roadless areas protect some of the best watersheds.
I live in Colorado, which has a different state-specific roadless rule. Idaho has the same situation, so the federal roadless rule disappearing wouldn't impact the roadless areas in my home state, which I'm really thankful for, because that mountain is the beginning of the headwaters for my drinking water out in Colorado. So even though there's only 3 hours difference, this area and its drinking water are threatened by the potential removal of a federal rule, whereas our state level rule would continue existing. A forest has this incredible ability to catch rain, not just as fog and clouds pass through it and then trickle down through the branches, but also when it falls on them, the branches and root systems literally take pollutants out of the water. It would be much more difficult and much more expensive to process water that wasn't already run through the natural filtration systems of areas like roadless forests.
Road building and logging are also among the top causes of erosion. Increased sediment and pollution degrades waterways. That's bad for salmon, trout, hellbenders, the entire ecosystem, and for the communities drinking this water. Erosion from roads and logging also worsens flooding and makes landslides significantly more frequent.
This is a catastrophic flood by every stretch that you can imagine.
North Carolina is cleaning up from the worst flooding ever on record for the state.
At least 182 lives lost, hundreds still unaccounted for.
And communities still cut off.
Hurricane Helene caused more than 2,000 landslides across the southern Appalachians, disproportionately occurring on slopes modified by roads and other developments. Back in 2017, the North Carolina Geological Survey compiled data for more than 200 landslides throughout the region, finding that 89% occurred where roads and other development had modified slopes.
I mean, the road is like the step one to letting all the other stuff in.
There's step one to logging and mining and all kinds of other industry, and people throw cigarettes out their windows and light wildfires, and all these human-caused issues in the outdoors start with roads.
But it works the other way too. If you shut off the road, then you pretty effectively shut out a lot of the other stuff too.
Because roads are the primary arteries for so many negative human changes to the landscape, it can reasonably be argued that roadlessness is the quality that best defines wilderness. Many of the early proponents of wilderness areas depicted them as vast landscapes devoid of people, but people have never been absent from these places.
Many of them are sacred to indigenous peoples around the country and important to their culture. The Tongass up in Alaska is extremely important.
The Roadless Rule protects not just the forests, wildlife, water, and other resources within roadless areas, but the right of indigenous communities to access and use them in the ways that they have since time immemorial. The Tongass is home to 19 federally recognized tribes, including the Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian. And roadless areas are important for preserving their traditional ways of life. Clean waterways protect salmon. Intact forests provide habitat for deer. Nutritional, medicinal, and ceremonial plants, and old-growth cedar trees used to make canoes, totem poles, and other cultural items. Traditional foods, particularly salmon, are central to traditional gatherings and ceremonies, and just an important day-to-day resource. Many communities in the Tongass are small and remote, making imported supplies expensive. The decision to rescind the Roadless Rule is being made without tribal input, violating treaties and other agreements between the tribes and the federal government, and overstepping tribal sovereignty.
That is beyond disrespectful. It's continuing the genocidal behavior of the United States against indigenous people.
North Carolina's mountains are the ancestral homeland of more than a dozen tribes, including the Cherokee. Not far from Chiowa Bald is the town of Robbinsville, once the Cherokee town of Chiowa. This was a key hub of the Cherokee territory, home to about 500 people. In 1838, the federal government forcefully deported them to Oklahoma, along with over 15,000 others from across the Cherokee territory. Some managed to take refuge in the surrounding mountains, including about 100 from Chiowa. Their descendants are the Eastern Band Cherokee living in the region today. The surrounding forests are filled with cultural sites, gathering places, rock art, homes, burials, and trails. Tribal archaeologist Dr. Beau Carroll emphasizes that these sites are more than just relics of past events and people. For the Cherokee today, they are living landscapes, home to those stories and ancestors themselves. In 2023, Forest Service archaeologist Scott Ashcraft filed a whistleblower report alleging that the agency had consistently failed to protect Cherokee sites from development. He described officials rushing surveys to complete construction, ignoring the concerns of archaeologists and tribal leaders, and ultimately building trails, trailheads, and parking lots on top of sites. Because most development is off limits in roadless areas, cultural sites within them are afforded a degree of protection.
Since they haven't been thoroughly inventoried for like a logging project or a mine, there's all sorts of stuff that's just kind of left to be how it should.
To quote Dr. Carroll directly, "Our ancestors didn't leave us books. They left us stories. And they left us the places where those stories happened. If we lose the place, we don't just lose a forest. We lose part of the story." Leopold's 1921 article predicted that roadless areas would one day become widely popular for recreation. This roadless area in Pisgah National Forest has some of the most popular hikes in North Carolina: Graveyard Fields, and Black Balsam. I remember my mom bringing me up here when I was, I think, 12. It was one of the first times that I brought my camera on a hike. In high school, I brought my girlfriend up here. It was our first time hiking together. And when we got engaged, we celebrated here, the Keenault Rainforest in Washington State, also a roadless area.
My first ever backpacking trip started in a roadless area and went into a wilderness area. I've built trails in roadless areas. Trail building was what's kind of opened up this career path of wanting to be involved and spending as much time as possible in places like this and helping other people spend as much time as possible in places like this and keep them around.
Pretty stunning.
This is insane.
So there's all of these facts and figures and research, and the feeling that I keep returning to is love. If I'm in a roadless area for long enough, I'll step out of myself and just into the world around me.
Pretty sweet place.
They're such loving places. They give so much, they don't ask anything in return. And so the opportunity to play a role in protecting them in this moment in history is a really, really special one.
Y'all, I could shed a tear right now. I am waiting around in the middle of the night, and I just found my first hellbender. It's a small one, but a hellbender nonetheless. Most of this watershed is protected under the Roadless Rule, which is quite beneficial for this little guy.
The approval rating for the Roadless Rule when it first came out in 2001 was enormous. And then last year, over 600,000 people wrote in a very short window. Over 99% of the people that wrote in said that they do still want the Roadless Rule to exist. So Americans have wanted this and will continue to want this. People who came before us did it, and now it's our turn. It's not something that hasn't been done before, and we can do it together.
The Roadless Rule itself includes all of this. It also talks about money. To quote directly, there presently exists a backlog of about $8.4 billion, and the cost of fixing deteriorating roads increases exponentially every year. It makes little fiscal or environmental sense to build additional roads when the agency is struggling to maintain its existing extensive road system. It goes on to describe how developments in roadless areas have to deal with remote terrain, require more extensive environmental impact statements, and are often appealed or litigated, making them just more expensive and difficult than other developments. They even say that some timber sales in roadless areas are likely to cost more than they make back.
This is an executive order relating to unleashing Alaska's potential as an energy reservoir for the entire nation.
I'll be signing an executive order freeing up our forests so that we're allowed to take down trees and make a lot of money and then reharvest trees.
It's been really clear by the current administration that the reason that they want to rescind this is so that they can open these places up to extractive industry. That's what they have said. And that extractive industry is not something that will benefit the majority of the American public, especially in the age of automation. We are in a new time. The number of people required to run a mine, to run a logging operation, is sometimes single digit when we're talking about destroying or tarnishing resources that entire towns and cities rely on.
When the Roadless Rule was issued in 2001, it went straight to court. Individual states sued, the timber industry sued, and in 2003, the federal government removed the Tongass from the rule. Then, in 2011, they put it back. In 2020, the first Trump administration removed the Tongass again. 2023, the Biden administration put it back. That brings us to last year.
The White House's plans to throw out the 25-year-old Roadless Rule will allow for permanent road construction and timber harvesting on nearly 59 million acres. When a 3-week public comment period opened last fall, more than 600,000 comments came in. 99% of them opposed rolling back the rule, with another comment period opening potentially soon.
That will be our last chance to weigh in.
Chief Schultz, I was thrilled by the announcement about the rescission of the 2001 Roadless Rule.
June 10th, the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee is hearing a bill called the Wildfire Prevention Act. It has bipartisan support. Just hours before the committee votes, Utah Senator Mike Lee slips in an amendment that would nullify the Roadless Rule. This causes a scene, and the bipartisan support is lost, but the committee still approves the bill, 11-9. The bill still has to pass the Senate, but if it does, we lose the Roadless Rule, and it will be near impossible to restore it in the future. The Senate can vote on the bill whenever they want to. They don't have to take public comment, and they don't have to give us a heads up. When the time comes, we may have just hours to call our senators and tell them to vote no. But if enough people do that, it works.
The vast majority of it has zero recreational value. A lot of it doesn't have any conservation value.
Last year, when Mike Lee tried to sell off millions of acres of public land in a very similar fashion, the people made a scene, and the bill was revised. It's unclear which of these will advance first, but when the time comes, we'll tell you what's happening and how you can make your voice heard, whether it's writing public comments or calling senators. Alex and I will both keep you in the loop, so subscribe here and follow him in the description. I've also linked a landing page made by Outdoor Alliance, which will continuously update, and I'll be updating the pinned comment on this video with any developments. If you care about the public lands that we are so lucky to have in this country, stay informed on this, and when the time comes, give them a piece of your mind. In Leopold's 1921 article, he writes that wilderness can never be created, only destroyed. It's a powerful statement, but sometimes I see things that make me question it ever so slightly. I see them in my backyard. We don't have the vast roadless areas found out west, but our forests are unique in their age. These trees weren't logged during the post-war timber boom. They were logged over a century ago. So today I see forests maturing and becoming better habitat for wildlife. I see old roads disappearing and a fragmented landscape fusing back together. Had my great-grandparents walked these trails, they would have seen clear cuts. Today, I walk through a healthy, mature forest. And if the roadless rule stands, my grandchildren could walk beneath an old-growth canopy. I can't tell you how much that future excites me. Or we can go another direction. We can rescind the roadless rule, build new roads, log old forests, poison our water, lose species, and lose money doing it. We can slice this country into ever smaller pieces until we no longer recognize it.